With the threshold to reflection, the universe, by way of humankind, stood face to face with itself. And that first look at itself brought an overpowering need to understand itself. This is Session 2, Reflective Earth, in a course titled Blueprint for Reconstruction, and that is an aspect of a larger view, evolution of consciousness theory. In this session, we look at how humanity's quest to understand itself, and its place in creation, has shaped the planet, the reflective Earth. With the threshold to reflection, circa 100,000 years ago, the direction of evolution on the level of the biosphere, centered on simplification, on the falling away of the species and ecosystems, not needed to support humankind's advance to greater understanding. This does not mean that new life did not emerge. Bacteria change form to accommodate new conditions. Through domestication, we create new strains of plants and animals. A generation after Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980, new forests had taken root, on land thought to be devastated ash fields. Subsequent to reflection, however, the overall thrust of the biosphere's evolution has been toward simplification. In the view of the paleontologist, upwards of 98% of the Earth's species have fallen into extinction. A turning point in the devolution of the biosphere took place about 12,000 years ago, when humankind moved away from a nomadic way of life and built the first settlements. In that urbanization compelled us to acquire food and other goods outside the settlement, inhabitants faced chronic scarcity. By virtue of our need for resources, we founded economics as we traditionally think about it, scarcity-based economics, and adopted notions of competition and survival of the fittest. Scarcity had another significant outcome. As communities grew in size, natural ecological systems in the vicinity could not provide for our material needs. Consequently, we began to modify these systems. In a significant way, we adopted agriculture, or the practice where, through the input of labor and organic material, we simplify species relationships to form an artificial ecosystem, one where species interact in a controlled way, to produce a desired product. With urbanization and agriculture, natural ecological systems existed alongside, and interacted with, artificial ecological systems. The biosphere's devolution continued, and, for the first time, human activity played a discernible role. To a degree, our actions directly influenced the course of evolution's trailing arrow. In part, we were responsible for molding what we can now properly call the Earth's urban and ecological infrastructure. This reshaping of our world was not limited to the countryside, but also took place in the urban community. The first settlements were little more than clusters of shelters, built near a stable source of food and water, or an area with trade or religious significance. In response to the human drive to create less collective societies, settlements became larger, and more structurally sophisticated. In pre-dynastic Egypt, the Nile Plateau saw a gradual transition to urban life. Communities were small, linked by the Nile itself. Life centered on the farmland, and on the system of irrigation canals that sustained it. As urbanization expanded, conflict became common, as alliances broke and formed, in our drive to create less collective societies. Cities were compact, enclosed by massive defensive battlements. In the Old Kingdom, and later in the Middle Kingdom, and in the New Kingdom, social conditions were at times more stable. Cities became larger and more accessible to outsiders. Builders worked with granite, marble, and limestone, and constructed the pyramids, and other monumental works of civic and religious architecture. In ancient Greece, the architect Hippodamus of Miletus, who planned the settlements of Priene and Piraeus, emphasized a geometric layout. Streets were arranged in a grid, and citadels were oriented to create a sense of balance. Housing was integrated with cultural, religious, commercial, and defense facilities. In Greek city planning, beauty was as much of a consideration as functionality. Cities were designed to be flowing and inspiring, with crowning structures built to honor the gods, and to elevate the spirit. Many cities were constructed in mountainous regions, where their layout was integrated into the natural landscape. Roman society was driven by ideals of power and grandeur. by the need to dominate man and nature. The layout of buildings emphasized symmetry, function, and a growing understanding of geometry and engineering. Colonial cities were planned as military camps, with buildings laid out in a grid, surrounded by square or rectangular defensive walls. In the eyes of its citizens, Rome was more than a city. It was the center of the universe, an idea, a vision. Streets were grand, paved with stone and brick. Structures were ornate, massive, imposing. Roman architects and engineers made extensive use of arch, vault, and dome construction. They also invented a building material that would dominate construction to this day: concrete. Roman builders discovered that if they heated limestone to the point where they could crumble it into a powder, and if, when cool, they mixed this powder with water, it would get hot and solidify, binding sand and gravel in a stone matrix. Though crude, the cement that held together this mixture, called quicklime, was strong enough to mortar the stones of the Colosseum and Roman aqueducts. Builders also used it to cast the massive concrete dome of the Pantheon. Completed in the year 128, the Rotunda dome measures 43.2 meters, or 142 feet, in diameter and has an 8.5 meter, or 28 foot, oculus. With the fall of Rome, Western architecture evolved through the Christian, Byzantine, Romanesque, and Gothic periods. The buildings of the medieval world were often not as imposing as the pyramids, Colosseum, and earlier monumental structures, but they showed a refinement of construction skills. They also showed a refinement of architectural principles. Unlike the engineer, who is concerned with the function and integrity of the building, the architect is concerned with its aesthetics and artistic statement. In this pursuit, mathematical principles may guide the architect in the quest for beauty. The simplest is the principle of symmetry. A pyramid, for example, is symmetrical. Each face is the same, and slopes away at the same angle. Closely related to the principle of symmetry is that of repetition. Often in architecture, a certain feature, an arch for example, is repeated. Roman buildings were often constructed with walls made of lines of large arches that supported walls made of lines of small arches. Dimensions that double, or by some other formula, systematically increase in size are also important. Large arches that are say twice the width and height of small arches. Around the year 1200, the Italian mathematician Leonardo da Fibonacci came across a sophisticated variation of this idea, the Fibonacci series. In this recurrent series, k sub n equals k sub n minus 1 plus k sub n minus 2, each number is the sum of the two numbers that preceded it, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, and so forth. Like a simplistic representation of evolution, the series builds on the old to create the new. And, as we would expect from such a representation, its proportions are found in nature. The curve of a nautilus shell spirals outward in a Fibonacci pattern. The growth patterns on the leaves of certain trees spiral outward in a Fibonacci pattern. The dimensions of the human body represent a Fibonacci pattern. Architects noticed something else about the Fibonacci series. Many of architecture's traditional and most pleasing forms followed this pattern. The ratio of two successive terms in the Fibonacci series converges on what architects call the golden ratio, the number 1.618. When proportioned according to the Fibonacci series and golden ratio, steps, columns, windows, furniture, and buildings looked right, aesthetic, pleasing to the eye. From our earliest settlements to the pyramids of ancient Egypt, the temples of ancient Greece, and the stadiums of ancient Rome, from the cathedrals of the Middle Ages to the boulevards and soaring domed churches of the Renaissance, in the architectural traditions of China, India, Russia, North Africa, and the New World, our urban environment reflected our knowledge of life and creation. As we better understood our world, we created less collective social orders, and our urban landscape evolved in response. We shaped our urban environment in ways we deemed practical and beautiful. At the end of the 18th century, the Industrial Revolution swept Europe, and the design of our rural and urban landscape entered its most recent phase. Locked in a mechanistic view of the world, architecture and urban planning lost much of the human quality prevalent in earlier periods. Buildings were square and practical, their architecture driven, less by aesthetic considerations than by cost and construction time. In 1811, New York City planners divided Manhattan into identical rectangular blocks to encourage access and settlement. In our quest to partition the earth in an orderly way, we stretched railroads across Asia, Africa, Europe, and the Americas. At the end of the 1800s, our molding of the human landscape marked a significant turn in the course of our advance to utilitarianism. The internal combustion engine became a practical alternative to the steam engine. Small and lightweight, it made possible a development that would alter the Earth's urban and ecological infrastructure in ways we a century ago could not have foreseen. In 1908, Henry Ford began mass production of an article known, loved, and hated by all, the automobile. With the universe's threshold to reflection, the leading edge of evolution moved beyond the evolutionary period of life, and entered the evolutionary period of understanding. Is this observation reasonable? What evidence supports this idea? With our look at the reflective Earth, we complete Session 2, in our course titled Blueprint for Reconstruction. We immerse ourselves in the present, and look at the philosophical struggle that today grips humankind's ability to shape its planet. Our course on the reconstruction of the Earth's urban and ecological infrastructure continues in Session 3, Clash of Ideologies.